In a significant shift in the ongoing Ukraine-Russia conflict, Russia has recently expressed openness to negotiating an end to the war. However, Moscow's willingness to engage in talks is contingent on a specific condition. The initiative must come from U.S. President-elect Donald Trump. This potential development, if it progresses, could mark a new chapter in the conflict, but with a complex set of challenges and conditions attached. Russia's ambassador to the United Nations in Geneva remarked that any negotiations should be grounded in the realities of the current battlefield, a term Moscow uses to underscore its territorial advances. This statement from Moscow comes as Ukraine also appears to be reconsidering its previous stances. Reports from Kyiv suggest that Ukrainian officials may now be prioritizing security guarantees over a complete recovery of all Russian-occupied territories. For months, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and his administration have strongly opposed any settlement that would require ceding territory to Russia. The sentiment across Ukrainian leadership has been consistent. Kyiv has steadfastly maintained that Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity are non-negotiable. However, recent remarks from Ukraine's Defense and Intelligence Committee chairman suggest a possible recalibration of this position. According to him, the primary focus of any prospective peace talks could be on securing ironclad guarantees for Ukraine's future security, relegating territorial discussions to a secondary role. Another senior Ukrainian official echoed this sentiment, stressing that while Ukraine's territorial claims are essential, the foremost concern is the assurance of long-term security guarantees. Several factors appear to be influencing Ukraine's evolving stance. Militarily, Ukraine has suffered notable setbacks, particularly on the Eastern Front, where Russian forces have made incremental but strategically valuable gains. Ukrainian troops continue to face intense fighting in critical areas, including Donetsk and Luhansk. The losses have been costly, both in terms of personnel and resources, leaving Kyiv with fewer options for a decisive military response. Geopolitically, the potential shift in the U.S. stance under a Trump administration introduces a new variable into Ukraine's decision-making process. Trump has signaled that he may seek to adjust America's role in the Ukraine conflict, potentially moving away from continued military support and toward fostering a diplomatic solution. Reports suggest that Trump is considering appointing a special envoy to expedite peace talks, and that his advisors have already developed a framework that could involve freezing the current front lines, establishing a demilitarized zone, and implementing a 20-year moratorium on Ukraine's NATO membership. This moratorium aligns with Russia's long-standing demand for a neutral Ukraine, as Moscow has consistently viewed NATO's presence near its borders as a direct security threat. While Trump's proposals emphasize achieving a ceasefire as an immediate goal, Ukraine remains cautious. Ukrainian officials have a vivid memory of past ceasefire violations by Russian forces, particularly in the aftermath of the Minsk agreements of 2014 and 2015. These agreements were intended to bring an end to hostilities in eastern Ukraine, but instead, fighting persisted, with both sides accusing each other of breaking the terms. The Ukrainian government worries that any new ceasefire or peace deal lacking strict enforcement mechanisms could leave Ukraine vulnerable to renewed Russian aggression in the future. Nevertheless, a shift appears to be taking shape in Ukrainian public opinion, with growing support for a compromise that could bring about peace, even if it involves territorial concessions. However, this remains a highly divisive issue, with strong nationalist factions still opposing any agreement that includes ceding Ukrainian territory. For analysts watching the situation closely, the odds of a favorable settlement for Ukraine seem slim as long as Russia maintains its military upper hand. Moscow's territorial advances, coupled with its unyielding stance on Ukraine's NATO status, imply that Russia is likely to only accept a peace settlement with substantial Ukrainian concessions. Some experts speculate that Moscow might be open to negotiating a ceasefire if Ukrainian forces agree to withdraw from the Kakhovka region. Such a withdrawal would allow Russia to consolidate its current territorial control and perhaps agree to a formal ceasefire by next spring. The potential involvement of Donald Trump in these negotiations adds another layer of complexity to an already intricate diplomatic landscape. Trump has repeatedly claimed that he could bring an end to the conflict swiftly, even suggesting he could do so in a day. While this claim is widely seen as hyperbolic, Trump's advisors have suggested that he could indeed jumpstart peace efforts shortly after assuming office. Trump's primary objective, according to his transition team, is to halt the bloodshed as quickly as possible. One advisor explained that Trump's priority is to stop the killing, preventing further loss of Ukrainian lives and stabilizing the conflict as a first step. From there, the focus could shift to longer-term negotiations and a sustainable peace agreement. At the core of Trump's proposed peace plan is a controversial idea: suspending Ukraine's NATO aspirations for the next 20 years. This concession would fulfill a critical Russian demand while allowing Ukraine to maintain its sovereignty. However, this proposal is likely to face significant resistance within Ukraine, where NATO membership has long been viewed as a protective measure, particularly after Russia's annexation of Crimea in 2014. For many Ukrainians, NATO represents a security umbrella that offers protection against future Russian incursions. Thus, Trump's proposal could face opposition not only from Ukrainian officials, but also from a significant portion of the Ukrainian public, who remain skeptical of any settlement that would limit their country's autonomy. Within Ukraine, there are increasing voices advocating for a compromise that could bring peace to the war-torn nation. Some factions within the government and civil society see a peace agreement as a pragmatic solution to a conflict that shows no signs of abating. However, the idea of ceding any portion of Ukraine's territory to Russia remains deeply divisive. Opinion polls show that while many Ukrainians are war-weary and supportive of efforts to end the conflict, a large portion remains wary of any agreement that involves surrendering land. Public sentiment is fractured, with some willing to prioritize an immediate end to hostilities, while others insist that Ukraine's sovereignty is paramount, even if it means continuing the fight. On the international stage, the road to a comprehensive settlement will require a delicate balancing act. Trump's administration, should it pursue peace negotiations, will face the challenge of harmonizing Ukraine's need for credible security assurances with Russia's insistence on a neutral Ukraine. Key European allies, particularly those in Eastern Europe, might view any concessions to Russia as a troubling precedent, fearing that such a move could embolden Russia and encourage further territorial ambitions. These allies are keen to prevent any outcome that would suggest aggression can yield positive results, as they see this as a direct threat to their own security. For Russia, its objectives in Ukraine have been clear since the onset of the conflict: maintaining a sphere of influence over Ukraine and preventing NATO encroachment. Moscow has consistently framed its military actions in Ukraine as defensive measures necessary to protect its national security interests. For the Kremlin, a neutral Ukraine serves as a strategic buffer, a critical component of its security calculus. If Trump's administration succeeds in negotiating a long-term moratorium on Ukraine's NATO membership, it would be a substantial victory for Russia, fulfilling one of its primary objectives in the conflict. Meanwhile, Ukrainian leaders are faced with a series of difficult decisions. President Zelensky and his government remain committed to preserving Ukraine's sovereignty, yet they are increasingly aware of the challenges associated with a prolonged conflict. Securing reliable security guarantees has become a paramount concern for Kyiv, as officials look for assurances that any peace agreement will provide meaningful protection against future aggression. This focus on enforceable security measures is a response to Ukraine's experience with previous failed ceasefires, such as the Minsk Accords. These accords ultimately did little to bring about lasting peace, leaving Ukrainian leaders wary of any agreement that lacks robust enforcement mechanisms. For Ukraine, the delicate balancing act lies in achieving a stable peace without compromising its sovereignty. Zelensky's administration remains adamant that any ceasefire or peace deal must be foolproof, with rigorous measures in place to prevent violations. This cautious approach reflects Ukraine's concerns about Russian intentions and the risk of renewed conflict. However, some officials acknowledge that Ukraine's options are limited by the current balance of power on the battlefield. International diplomacy will be essential in any potential peace process. Crafting a sustainable peace agreement will require a coordinated effort among Ukraine, Russia, the United States, and European allies. Trump's potential involvement could accelerate the pace of negotiations, but his administration will have to navigate the competing interests of all parties. Finding a balance between Ukraine's security needs and Russia's demand for neutrality will be challenging, and European allies are likely to play a crucial role in shaping the final outcome. In conclusion, the path to peace in Ukraine is fraught with complexities and high stakes. Each side holds firm on its demands, and the geopolitical consequences of the conflict are significant. Russia remains focused on securing its strategic interests, while Ukraine continues to fight for its sovereignty. Trump's proposed peace framework, which emphasizes a ceasefire and a moratorium on NATO membership, offers one potential path forward. However, achieving a durable solution will require careful, coordinated diplomacy, with each side willing to make meaningful concessions. As Russia consolidates control over occupied regions and Ukraine considers its limited options, the prospect of a negotiated peace hangs in the balance. The international community watches with cautious optimism, hoping that this moment could lead to an enduring resolution that brings lasting stability to Ukraine and the region.